Lee Hyun sat in the cold metal chair inside the alien prison cell and watched the blue-skinned guards walk back and forth outside his cage. The Vorthon soldiers thought they had caught themselves a big prize when they captured his small Earth patrol ship 3 days ago. They whispered to each other in their clicking language and pointed at him like he was some kind of dangerous animal in a zoo. If only they knew the truth. Lee Hyun was not just any human patrol officer wandering around in space. He was a former Navy SEAL with 15 years of combat experience, and he had let them capture him on purpose. For 3 long months he had been tracking the slave ships that moved through the dark spaces between star systems. Every lead he followed pointed to something much bigger and more terrible than anyone back on Earth suspected. The metal floor of the prison ship vibrated under his feet as the massive engines pushed them through hyperspace toward their destination. Lee Hyun had memorized every sound the ship made during his 3 days as a prisoner. He knew when the guards changed shifts every 6 hours. He knew which corridors they used to move around the ship. He knew where they kept their weapons and how many soldiers were on board. Most importantly, he knew they were taking him exactly where he wanted to go. The Vorthons believed they had captured a simple human who had gotten lost in space and wandered into their territory by accident. They had no idea that Lee Hyun had been hunting them for months. They did not know that 17 human colonies had disappeared without any trace in the past year. The Galactic Council said they were investigating, but their investigation was moving so slowly that more people disappeared every week. Lee Hyun had volunteered for this mission when the official channels failed. Someone had to find out what was happening to the missing humans, and someone had to stop it. The Earth military could not send an official force without starting a war with the Galactic Council. So they sent one man who could disappear without causing diplomatic problems. Through the small window in his cell, Lee Hyun could see stars rushing past as they traveled through hyperspace. The Vorthons had told him they were taking him to Nexus Prime for trial. Nexus Prime was the capital world of the Galactic Council, where the most important alien leaders made decisions about war and peace throughout the galaxy. The irony was not lost on him. The same people who were supposed to protect human colonies were probably the ones selling them into slavery. Lee Hyun flexed his hands against the energy restraints that bound his wrists. The alien technology sent small shocks through his arms every time he moved, but the pain was nothing compared to what he had endured during SEAL training. The restraints were designed to hold ordinary prisoners from most alien species. They were not designed to hold someone who had been trained to escape from any kind of bondage. The Vorthons had made several mistakes when they captured him. First, they had assumed that all humans had the same physical capabilities. They did not know that some humans trained their bodies and minds to do things that seemed impossible. Second, they had searched his ship, but they had not searched inside his body where he had hidden the tools he would need to escape. Third, and most important, they thought they were bringing him to trial as a prisoner. They did not realize they were delivering him right into the heart of the conspiracy he had been hunting. One of the guards stopped in front of his cell and stared at him with large yellow eyes. The Vorthon made clicking sounds that Lee Hyun had learned meant something like curiosity or confusion. The alien had probably never seen a human up close before. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were primitive and weak compared to the advanced aliens who ruled the Galactic Council. That was another mistake they would regret making. Lee Hyun had studied the files on every major alien species before starting this mission. The Vorthons were strong and had tough skin that could stop small weapons, but they were slow and they relied too much on their technology. They had never learned to fight with their hands and feet the way humans did. They had never trained to keep fighting when they were hurt or outnumbered. The guard clicked something that sounded like a question, but Lee Hyun just stared back without saying anything. He had been playing the role of a confused and defeated prisoner since his capture. As far as the Vorthons knew, he was just a scared human who did not understand what was happening to him. Let them think that. It would make what came next much easier. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Lee Hyun felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity adjusting to normal spaceflight. Through his window, he could see a massive planet covered in glittering cities and surrounded by hundreds of space stations. This was Nexus Prime, the center of galactic civilization, and the place where his real mission would begin. Soon the Vorthans would put him on trial for crimes he had actually committed. He had destroyed their slave ships and killed their traders, and he would do it again if he had the chance. But the trial would give him access to the most secure areas of Nexus Prime. It would put him in the same room as the corrupt officials who were selling human beings like cattle. The energy restraints around his wrists hummed with power, but Lee Hyun smiled slightly as he felt the microscopic device in his stomach finally beginning to dissolve. In a few more hours, the hidden tool would be ready to use. Then the Vorthans would learn what happened when you underestimated a human warrior. The prison ship docked with one of the orbital stations around Nexus Prime, and Lee Hyun heard the guards preparing to transfer him to the surface. Everything was going according to plan. The hardest part had been letting himself get captured without fighting back. Now he was exactly where he needed to be to find the truth about the missing colonies. The door to his cell opened, and 4 heavily armed guards motioned for him to stand up. Lee Hyun played his role perfectly, stumbling a little, as if the energy restraints were making him weak. The guards relaxed slightly when they saw how harmless he seemed. They had no idea that in less than 24 hours, their entire operation would be exposed and their leaders would be dead. Lee Hyun had not come to Nexus Prime to stand trial. He had come to be judge, jury, and executioner. The great hall of the Galactic Tribunal was unlike anything most humans had ever seen. The walls were made of some kind of crystal that glowed with soft blue light, and the ceiling stretched up so high that it disappeared into darkness. Hundreds of alien beings sat in curved rows looking down at the center of the room where prisoners stood trial. Lee Hyun walked into the hall with his hands still bound by energy restraints, but his eyes were alert and watching everything. The guards thought he was nervous about his trial, but he was actually studying the faces of every important alien in the room. Somewhere among these so-called leaders of galactic justice were the people responsible for selling human beings into slavery. The chief magistrate was a creature called Kale Rothan that looked like a giant insect with multiple arms and compound eyes that reflected the light like broken glass. When Kale Rothan spoke, his voice came from speakers built into the walls because the sounds he made were too high-pitched for most species to hear naturally. The charges against Lee Hyun were read in several different languages so that all the alien species could understand. Destruction of Vorthan shipping vessels, murder of trade officials, terrorist activities in neutral space, acts of war against peaceful merchants. The list went on, and every single charge was technically true. What the tribunal did not know was what those shipping vessels had really been carrying. What they did not know was what those trade officials had really been doing with their human cargo. What they did not know was that those peaceful merchants had been stealing children from human colonies and selling them to alien laboratories. Lee Hyun spotted Ambassador Park Jin-woo sitting in the section reserved for Earth representatives. Park Jin-woo was one of the few people who knew the real reason Lee Hyun was on this mission. The ambassador looked calm and professional, but Lee Hyun could see the tension in his shoulders. Park Jin-woo knew that if this plan failed, it would mean war between Earth and the Galactic Council. The prosecution began presenting their evidence against Lee Hyun. They showed video recordings of him attacking Vorthon ships. They played audio recordings of him threatening alien traders. They displayed weapons that had been taken from his ship. Everything they showed painted the picture of a violent human who had gone completely insane and started killing innocent aliens. But Lee Hyun was not really listening to the accusations against him. Instead, he was watching for small signs that would tell him which of these judges were part of the conspiracy. When they talked about the destroyed ship called Meridian, he saw Magistrate Velkorson twitch one of his tentacles. When they mentioned the missing Kepler colony, he noticed that Trade Representative Nix Velen started breathing faster. These were the tells he had been trained to spot during his years as a SEAL. People could control their faces and their voices, but they could not always control their bodies when they heard something that made them nervous. Even alien bodies had reactions that could be read if you knew what to look for. The trial was supposed to last for 3 days, while the tribunal heard all the evidence and decided Lee Hyun fate. But he knew it would not take that long. Tonight, when most of the aliens were sleeping, he would begin the real mission. The energy restraints they had put on him were impressive technology, but they were not designed to hold someone who had prepared for this exact situation. 3 months ago, Before he started hunting the slave ships, Lee Hyun had undergone a surgical procedure that was known only to the most elite Special Forces soldiers. A tiny device had been implanted in his stomach that would dissolve slowly over time. When it finally broke apart, it would release tools that could override most standard alien security systems. The prosecution finished presenting their case, and now it was time for Lee Hyun to defend himself. The tribunal expected him to beg for mercy or claim that he was innocent. Instead, Lee Hyun stood up slowly and looked directly at Chief Magistrate Kale Rothon. The whole room became quiet as they waited to hear what the human prisoner would say. Lee Hyun spoke in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the great hall. He said that he was guilty of every single charge they had brought against him. He had destroyed their ships and killed their people, and he would do it again if he had the chance. But he also said that the tribunal was making a mistake if they thought he was just a criminal. The aliens began making angry sounds, and some of them stood up to demand that Lee Hyun be silenced. But Chief Magistrate Kale Rothon raised one of his insect arms, and the room became quiet again. He wanted to hear what else the human had to say. Lee Hyun told the tribunal that they were right to call him a monster, but he said that monsters were sometimes necessary when dealing with other monsters. He said that the creatures who stole children and sold families into slavery were the real criminals. He said that anyone who protected those criminals was just as guilty as they were. The accusation sent waves of shock through the alien audience. Some of them seemed genuinely surprised by what Lee Hyun was saying. Others looked nervous or angry, in ways that told him they knew exactly what he was talking about. The conspiracy was bigger than he had suspected, and it reached higher into the Galactic Council than anyone on Earth had imagined. Ambassador Park Jin-woo was staring at him with wide eyes. This was not part of the plan they had discussed. Lee Hyun was supposed to stay quiet and play the role of a defeated prisoner, but Lee Hyun had decided that subtlety was not going to work. Sometimes the only way to flush out your enemies was to make them panic. Chief Magistrate Kale Rothon declared that the trial would continue the next day after the judges had time to consider Lee Hyun's statements. The guards moved forward to escort him back to his cell, but Lee Hyun could see that his words had already started to have an effect. Some of the aliens were talking quietly among themselves and pointing at other judges. Some looked confused while others looked afraid. The conspiracy had worked because it had been secret. Now that it was being discussed openly in the most important court in the galaxy, the conspirators would have to choose between exposure and action. Lee Hyun hoped they would choose action. It would make them easier to identify and eliminate. As the guards led him out of the Great Hall, he caught one last look at Magistrate Vel Corson and Trade Representative Nix Velen. Both aliens were staring at him with expressions that confirmed what he already suspected. Tonight, when the station entered its sleep cycle, these two would probably try to have him killed before he could say anything else. They would send assassins to his cell expecting to find a helpless prisoner. Instead, they would find a Navy SEAL who had been waiting 3 days for someone to make exactly that mistake. At exactly 2 a.m. station time, Lee Hyun felt the tiny device in his stomach finally dissolve completely. The microscopic components that had been designed by Earth-best military engineers spread through his bloodstream and began to interact with the energy restraints around his wrists. Within minutes, the humming sound stopped and the restraints fell to the floor of his cell with a soft metallic clink. Lee Hyun flexed his fingers and rotated his shoulders, working feeling back into his arms after 3 days of being bound. The first part of his plan had worked perfectly. Now came the dangerous part where everything could go wrong in 100 different ways. But that was exactly the kind of situation he had been trained for during his 15 years as a Navy SEAL. The lock on his cell door was a complex piece of alien technology that relied on both energy fields and mechanical components. Most prisoners would never be able to break free from such an advanced system. But Lee Hyun was not most prisoners, and he had spent months studying Vorthan security systems before allowing himself to be captured. He used his fingernails to remove a small piece of metal from the collar of his prison uniform. The metal had been shaped and sharpened during his 3 days in the cell, while the guards thought he was just scratching at his clothes nervously. Now the improvised tool slid into a tiny gap in the door mechanism, and Lee Hyun applied pressure at exactly the right angle. The energy field flickered for just a moment, but that was long enough for him to grab the manual override handle that was hidden behind a small panel. The door slid open with almost no sound, and Lee Hyun stepped out into the corridor outside his cell block. The prison section of the station was dimly lit during the night cycle, and most of the guards were either sleeping or stationed at the main security posts. Lee Hyun had memorized their patrol patterns during his imprisonment, and he knew exactly when and where he could move without being seen. His first destination was the evidence storage area where the Vorthons were keeping his confiscated equipment. The corridor leading to the storage area was protected by motion sensors and automated defense systems, but Lee Hyun had learned to move in ways that most aliens could not detect. He crawled along the floor, staying close to the walls and timing his movements to match the rhythm of the station life support systems. The evidence locker was secured with both an electronic lock and a backup mechanical system. Lee Hyun disabled the electronic components first using techniques he had learned during covert operations on Earth. Then he picked the mechanical lock using tools he improvised from pieces of his prison uniform and fragments of metal he had collected. Inside the locker, he found his combat knife, his modified sidearm, and most importantly, the data storage device that contained everything he had learned about the slave trade network during his months of investigation. The device looked like an ordinary piece of jewelry, but it held enough information to bring down the entire conspiracy if it reached the right people on Earth. Lee Hyun strapped the knife to his leg and checked his sidearm to make sure it had not been damaged. The weapon had been modified with components that were not available to most humans. It could fire both standard energy bolts and special rounds that were designed to penetrate alien armor and shields. Moving through the station maintenance tunnels, Lee Hyun made his way toward the restricted administrative section, where the most sensitive information was kept. His investigation had revealed that the missing human colonists were not just being sold as ordinary slaves. They were being delivered to secret research facilities where alien scientists were conducting experiments to understand what made humans so effective in combat. The first guard he encountered was a young Vorthon who was probably new to security duty. The alien was standing at his post, but his attention was focused on a handheld entertainment device instead of watching the corridor. Lee Hyun approached from behind and used his knife to cut through the nerve cluster at the base of the Vorthon neck. The guard died instantly without making any sound. The second guard was more experienced and more alert. He spotted Lee Hyun moving through the shadows and started to raise an alarm. But Lee Hyun was already moving. He threw his knife with deadly accuracy, and the blade buried itself in the guard's throat before the alien could make any sound. Then Lee Hyun retrieved his weapon and continued toward his objective. The third guard did manage to activate an emergency signal before Lee Hyun could reach him. Suddenly, alarms were ringing throughout the station and emergency lights were flashing in the corridors. Lee Hyun knew that within minutes the entire station security force would be hunting for him, but he also knew that he was only 50 meters away from Magistrate Vel Corson private office, where the most damaging evidence was hidden. The door to the office was protected by the most advanced security system on the station, but Lee Hyun had prepared for this moment. The components from his dissolved implant were still active in his bloodstream, and when he pressed his hand against the door scanner, they created a false reading that convinced the system he was an authorized user. Inside the office, Lee Hyun found exactly what he had been looking for. Hidden behind a false wall was a data storage system that contained detailed records of every illegal transaction the conspiracy had conducted over the past 5 years. The files showed not just the sale of human slaves, but also the locations of the secret research facilities and the names of every corrupt official involved in the operation. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Ambassador Park Jin-woo was listed as one of the primary coordinators of the conspiracy. The man who had authorized Lee Hyun's mission was actually working with the aliens who were enslaving human colonists. The betrayal hurt, but Lee Hyun had been a soldier long enough to know that in war, you could never trust anyone completely. The sound of heavy boots in the corridor outside told him that the station security forces were closing in on his position. Lee Hyun began uploading the stolen data to a secure communication channel that would transmit the information directly to Earth Military Command. The upload would take several minutes to complete, and he could hear the security forces setting up outside the office door. When you were outnumbered and surrounded, the goal was not to fight your way out. The goal was to make sure the mission succeeded, even if you did not survive to see the results. Lee Hyun had set explosive charges at key points throughout the office that would destroy any remaining evidence, while creating enough chaos for him to attempt an escape. But as he waited for the data upload to finish, he heard something that changed everything. The explosions rocking the station were not coming from his improvised charges. Someone else was attacking the tribunal station, and from the sound of the weapons being used, they were not aliens. Through the smoke and chaos, Lee Hyun saw familiar shapes moving through the corridor outside. Earth Defense Force Marines in full combat armor were fighting their way through the station using tactics and equipment that he recognized immediately. At the head of the assault team was Colonel Cho Min-ho, his former commanding officer, and one of the few people who had known about his real mission from the beginning. The rescue had been planned as a backup option in case Lee Hyun's mission was compromised or if he discovered something too important to risk losing. The data he had just transmitted had obviously triggered that contingency. Earth Military Command had decided that diplomatic relations were less important than stopping the conspiracy that was enslaving human beings. Lee Hyun smiled grimly as he watched his fellow soldiers cut through the alien security forces with ruthless efficiency. The Galactic Council had made a serious mistake when they decided to put a Navy SEAL on trial. They had given Earth military the perfect excuse to show the galaxy exactly what humans could do when they stopped playing by everyone else's rules. Inside Magistrate Vel Corson hidden data vault, Lee Hyun discovered files that made his blood run cold. The conspiracy was not just about selling humans into slavery. It was about something far worse, and it reached into the highest levels of the Galactic Council in ways that threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. The missing colonists from New Beijing Colony had not been sold to ordinary slave markets. According to the detailed records Lee Hyun was reading, they had been delivered to a secret research facility called Black Site Omega in the Void Nebula region. The same fate had befallen the people from Harmony Station New Terra Settlement and 15 other human colonies that had disappeared over the past 2 years. The research being conducted at these hidden facilities was designed to understand what made humans so dangerous in combat compared to other species in the galaxy. Alien scientists were dissecting human soldiers to study their muscle structure and bone density. They were conducting psychological experiments to understand human pain tolerance and aggression levels. They were even breeding programs designed to create hybrid creatures that combined human traits with alien technology. Dr. Kim So-young had been the chief medical researcher at Harmony Station before its disappearance 6 months ago. According to the files, she was still alive and being held at Black Site Omega, where she was being forced to assist in the experiments. The aliens were using her knowledge of human biology to help them understand what made her own species so effective at warfare. But the most shocking discovery was buried deep in the encrypted files. The conspiracy was not being run by the Vorthans or any of the alien species that Lee Hyun had suspected. It was being coordinated by humans. Ambassador Park Jin-woo was not just involved in the slave trade. He was one of its primary architects. The files showed that Park Jin-woo had been working with corrupt aliens for over 3 years to systematically eliminate human colonies that might become military threats to the Galactic Council. The official story was always that the colonies had been attacked by pirates or destroyed by natural disasters. The reality was that they were being harvested to supply the secret research programs. Even worse, Park Jin-woo was not working alone. The conspiracy included human officials in the Colonial Administration Earth Military Command, and even some members of the Earth Council itself. They had convinced themselves that sacrificing small isolated colonies was necessary to prevent a larger war between humans and the rest of the galaxy. Lee Hyun felt sick as he read through the communications between Park Jin-woo and his alien partners. They discussed human colonists like they were discussing livestock. They debated which settlements would provide the best research subjects. They planned the fake emergencies that would lure rescue ships into traps where more humans could be captured. The sound of explosions and weapons fire outside was getting louder as the Earth Defense Force Marines fought their way deeper into the station. Lee Hyun knew that Colonel Cho Min-ho and his team were probably taking heavy casualties against the alien security forces, but the data he was discovering was worth any sacrifice to bring it back to Earth. According to the research, files, the aliens had made some disturbing discoveries about human physiology and psychology. They had confirmed that humans were significantly stronger and faster than most other species when fighting for survival. They had documented human ability to function with injuries that would disable or kill other creatures. Most importantly, they had identified the psychological factors that made humans willing to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor or duty. The alien researchers were particularly interested in something they called the human berserker response. This was the documented tendency of human soldiers to become more dangerous, rather than less dangerous when they were wounded or when they saw their companions killed. The aliens had never encountered this kind of behavior in any other species, and they were desperately trying to understand how to replicate it or defend against it. But the research was not just academic. The files showed that the aliens were developing new weapons and tactics specifically designed to fight human soldiers. They were creating energy weapons that targeted human nervous systems. They were designing armor that could withstand human physical attacks. They were even developing psychological warfare techniques based on their understanding of human emotional responses. Lee Hyun realized that this conspiracy was not just about enslaving a few thousand colonists. It was preparation for a war between humans and the rest of the galaxy. The aliens had decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to expand freely through space. The research facilities were designed to give them the knowledge they would need to exterminate humanity before Earth became powerful enough to threaten their control of the galaxy. The door to the data vault exploded inward, and Colonel Cho Min-ho stepped through the smoke with his plasma rifle ready to fire. When he saw Lee Hyun standing among the scattered files, his weathered face broke into a grin that was visible even through his combat helmet. The colonel quickly explained what had happened after Lee Hyun transmitted data reached Earth. The evidence of the conspiracy had been enough to convince Earth Military Command that they were facing an imminent threat to human survival. Within hours of receiving the intelligence, Earth had authorized immediate military action against the tribunal station. But the rescue mission had revealed something even more disturbing. The alien security forces had been expecting the attack. They had been prepared with weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter human military capabilities. Someone had warned them that Earth forces were coming, and that someone had detailed knowledge of human combat doctrine. Colonel Cho Min-ho's voice was grim as he explained that the betrayal went deeper than they had suspected. The aliens had not just been studying captured humans. They had been receiving intelligence directly from humans who were working with the conspiracy. Every major Earth military operation for the past 2 years had probably been compromised. Lee Hyun showed the colonel the files that identified Ambassador Park Jin-woo and the other human conspirators. The list included names that shocked both men: General Wang Sung-ho, who commanded Earth orbital defenses, Director Lee Min-jung, who ran the colonial administration, even Admiral Kim Tae-hyun, who was responsible for protecting Earth shipping lanes. Maui conspiracy had been structured so that the human traitors could eliminate any colonists who might discover the truth, while the alien partners could eliminate any Earth officials who became suspicious. It was a perfect system for genocide disguised as bureaucratic incompetence and random pirate attacks. But now that the system was exposed, it would collapse quickly. The data that Lee Hyun had transmitted would allow Earth Military Command to identify and arrest every human involved in the conspiracy. More importantly, it would give Earth the evidence needed to convince other alien species that the Galactic Council leadership was corrupt and dangerous. As they prepared to evacuate the station, Colonel Cho Min-ho told Lee Hyun that the war had already begun. Earth military forces were simultaneously attacking all of the known black site facilities to rescue the human prisoners and destroy the research programs. Other alien species who had been victims of similar conspiracies were joining the fight against the corrupt council leadership. What had started as Lee Hyun's personal mission to find missing colonists had become the spark that ignited a galactic civil war. The aliens who had called him a war criminal were about to discover what humans could accomplish when they stopped pretending to be civilized and started fighting for their survival. The data transmission had barely finished uploading when the first massive explosion shook the entire tribunal station. Lee Hyun had expected his improvised charges to create some chaos, but this was something much bigger. The station hull was actually buckling from whatever was hitting it, and the emergency lighting systems were failing throughout entire sections. Through the thick smoke that was pouring into Magistrate Vel Corson office, Lee Hyun could hear the distinctive sound of human plasma rifles firing in coordinated volleys, but there were also other weapons that he did not recognize. Energy blasts that made different sounds and created different colors when they hit their targets. Someone was fighting alongside the Earth Defense Force Marines, and they were not human. Colonel Cho Min-ho appeared through the smoke with his combat armor scorched and his helmet cracked from weapons fire. Behind him came two other figures that made Lee Hyun stop and stare. One was wearing the crystalline armor of the Zilani warrior caste. The other had the distinctive tentacled form of a Korath battle commander. The colonel quickly explained what was happening while his team secured the office and gathered the stolen data files. Lee Hyun transmission had not just reached Earth Military Command. It had been intercepted by intelligence networks belonging to several other species who had been conducting their own secret investigations into missing colonies and unexplained disappearances. The Zilani had lost 3 entire settlements in the past year, with over 50,000 people simply vanishing without any trace. The Korath had been tracking slave ships that were capturing their people for illegal medical experiments. Even the insectoid Theks had been investigating the disappearance of their colony ships in deep space regions. What Lee Hyun had discovered about the human slave trade was just one part of a much larger conspiracy. The corrupt elements within the Galactic Council had been systematically targeting any species they considered militarily dangerous. They were not just trying to eliminate humans, they were trying to eliminate anyone who might threaten their control of the galaxy. The Zilani warrior introduced herself as Commander Kira Veltan and explained that her people had been preparing for war against the Galactic Council for months. The Korath battle commander was named Zex Marath, and his fleet had been gathering in the Void Nebula region waiting for the right moment to strike. The discovery of Lee Hyun intelligence had finally given them the evidence they needed to justify open warfare. But the most shocking revelation came when Colonel Cho Min-ho explained how the rescue mission had been planned. Earth Military Command had not just decided to extract Lee Hyun because of the data he had transmitted. They had been contacted by representatives from multiple alien species who wanted to coordinate a joint attack against the conspiracy. Ambassador Park Jin-woo's betrayal had actually served an unintended purpose. His communications with the alien conspirators had been monitored by the intelligence services of the very species he was trying to eliminate. When those species realized that humans were also being targeted, they had reached out to Earth to propose an alliance. The attack on the Tribunal Station was not just a rescue mission. It was the opening move in a coordinated military campaign that involved Earth Zilani Korath and at least 6 other species who had been victims of the conspiracy. The corrupt Galactic Council was facing a rebellion that included some of the most dangerous military powers in the galaxy. Lee Hyun felt a grim satisfaction as he realized what his infiltration mission had accomplished. The conspiracy had worked because it had kept its victims isolated and suspicious of each other. Now that the truth was exposed, the victims were working together and their combined military power was overwhelming the corrupt council forces. The evacuation of the Tribunal Station turned into a running battle as alien security forces tried to prevent the joint military force from escaping with their prisoners and stolen data. But the human Marines fought with a ferocity that shocked even their new alien allies. When Zilani warriors saw human soldiers continue fighting with wounds that should have been fatal, they began to understand why the conspirators had been so afraid of human military expansion. During the fighting, Lee Hyun witnessed something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A young Earth Marine named Sergeant Park Hye-jin was pinned down by enemy fire while trying to rescue wounded Korath soldiers. She had been shot multiple times and was losing blood rapidly. Any rational person would have taken cover and waited for backup. Instead, Sergeant Park Hye-jin charged directly at the enemy position while screaming at the top of her lungs. The alien soldiers were so shocked by her seemingly suicidal attack that they hesitated for just a moment. That hesitation was all she needed to get close enough to use her sidearm and grenades to eliminate the entire enemy squad. Commander Kira. Felton watched the entire incident, and afterward she told Li Hyun that her people had legends about berserker warriors who could channel pure rage into unstoppable fighting fury. She had always assumed the legends were just stories. Now she was seeing the reality, and she understood why the Galactic Council conspirators had been so desperate to study and eliminate humans. The Joint Task Force successfully evacuated the Tribunal Station with hundreds of rescued prisoners and enough stolen data to expose the entire conspiracy. But as their ships jumped into hyperspace, Li Hyun knew that the real war was just beginning. The corrupt Council forces would not surrender easily, and they still controlled most of the galaxy military resources. Colonel Cho Min-ho showed him intelligence reports that painted a sobering picture of what they were facing. The conspiracy controlled at least 30 star systems and had military forces that outnumbered the rebellion by almost 3-1. They also had access to experimental weapons that had been developed using research conducted on captured prisoners from multiple species. But the rebellion had advantages that could not be measured in numbers or technology. They had the moral authority that came from fighting against slavery and genocide. They had the desperate courage of people fighting for their survival. Most importantly, they had humans who were willing to do whatever it took to protect their families and their freedom. As Li Hyun looked out at the stars streaming past their ship, he reflected on how much had changed since his capture just a few days ago. He had started this mission as a lone SEAL trying to find missing colonists. Now he was part of a galactic rebellion that would determine the future of human civilization. The aliens had called him a war criminal for destroying their slave ships and killing their corrupt officials. Soon, they would learn what humans could accomplish when they had entire fleets and armies to work with, instead of just one soldier operating alone. 6 months after the assault on the Tribunal Station, Li Hyun stood on the bridge of the Earth battleship Indomitable, watching as the last of the Black Site facilities was destroyed by combined fleet forces. The war that had erupted from his discovery had been swift and brutal, but it had accomplished something that decades of diplomacy had failed to achieve. The corrupt elements within the Galactic Council had been exposed and eliminated. Dr. Kim So-young and thousands of other prisoners had been rescued from the research facilities scattered throughout the void. The experiments that had been conducted on them were horrifying, but they had also inadvertently provided Earth's military with valuable intelligence about how other species perceived human combat capabilities. The aliens had been right about one thing. Humans were exceptionally dangerous when fighting for their survival or the protection of their own. Ambassador Park Jin-woo had been arrested and faced charges of treason on Earth, but his betrayal had actually served an unintended purpose. His involvement in the conspiracy had been the final piece of evidence needed to convince the reformed Galactic Council that humans deserved full military autonomy. Earth was no longer subject to the restrictions that had previously limited human expansion and defense capabilities. Li Hyun had been officially cleared of all war crimes charges, but he found the legal vindication less satisfying than the practical results. The slave trade networks had been dismantled, the missing colonists had been found, and the corrupt officials who had hidden behind legal immunity were now facing justice from their own people. More importantly, the galaxy now understood that humans weren't just another primitive species to be exploited and controlled. Standing beside him on the bridge, Colonel Cho commented on how a single SEAL's infiltration mission had managed to reshape galactic politics. Li Hyun nodded, but his thoughts were already turning toward the future. The galaxy was a big place, full of species that still thought humans were easy targets. The War Crimes Tribunal had called him a monster for destroying their illegal operations and killing their corrupt officials. They had been right about one thing. When it came to protecting innocent people from exploitation and torture, Li Hyun was willing to be exactly the kind of monster that the galaxy's predators needed to fear. The difference was that now, instead of operating alone in the shadows, he had the backing of Earth's full military might and a coalition of allied species who had learned to respect what humans could accomplish when they stopped playing by everyone else's rules.